Hello and welcome to today's lecture. And what we're going to discuss today is the topic of personality disorders. Now, first of all, personality is quite an interesting topic. Of course, it's because you have a personality type and I have a personality type. When we talk about personality, we're actually referring to our ways of being. So that means that we have our ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, or reacting to different people, situations, and things. So that makes you and me unique because we react or we have different ways of being. Now, as we go through the survey of personality disorders, you'll kind of find out whether you're still normal or abnormal. So try to find out through our lecture whether you need the help of a shrink. So let's go down and discuss the personality disorders. When we talk about personality disorders, we're actually referring to chronic, rigid, and maladaptive patterns of behavior. Chronic refers to long-term, which means that it might even be a lifetime that you may have these patterns of behavior. So that's the period of time, no? Personality disorders are also rigid in the sense that they're inflexible. So whatever situation the person is in, the person will have just one style of being, one way of being. And with personality disorders, there's also a sense of being maladaptive. The person can't adjust himself or herself to the situation. And the adjustment is kind of wrong. Okay? Now, personality disorders can cause personal distress. It can also cause social problems. And it can also cause occupational problems. So you can see that personality disorders kind of interfere or disturb the person's ability to live a satisfying life. Now, personality disorders are quite ingrained in the individual's psychological makeup. It's like a computer. The personality disorder is the person is hardwired to have that personality. So it's in that person's being. And persons with personality disorders are generally not aware that they have it, which means they have poor insight about their problems or about the causes of their problems. Now, persons with personality disorders do not have frank psychotic symptoms. So that makes them different from people with psychosis, no? People with personality disorders do not seek psychiatric help, and they're actually very resistant to change. Now, these disorders actually originate way back in childhood, and they actually continue throughout the adult years. Now, let's discuss the topic of significant comorbidity. This simply means that about half of the people diagnosed with a personality disorder also fit the criteria for having another personality disorder. So you can imagine, it's hard enough to have one personality disorder. What more if you have two or three? That will really make them tough to live with themselves or live with others. And we also have to consider that there's also a gender bias when we diagnose people with these disorders, no? This means that when clinicians or researchers know that the person is male or female, it's easier for them to give a certain diagnosis. For instance, women are more diagnosed to have histrionic or borderline personality disorders, while men are diagnosed more to have antisocial personality disorders or narcissistic personality disorders. So the truth is that There may be a gender bias, and we have to be objective so that we're not influenced by our own biases. Now let's go to the classification of personality disorders. Um, Personality disorders are categorized by the DSM into clusters or groups. Now they're categorized into clusters because these some personality disorders actually have similar characteristics. Each cluster or each group will have its own hallmark characteristics, and they also have genetic or familial associations. Yeah, we'll discuss more about that later on. When we talk about genetic or familial associations, this just means that um, people with personality disorders probably have some other psychiatric disorders um, observed or noted in their family line. Okay, now let's discuss the clusters. There are clusters A, B, and C, and let's discuss cluster A first. Now, cluster A is composed of three types of personality disorders. These are the paranoid personality disorder, the schizoid personality disorder, and the schizotypal personality disorder. Now, I told you that the clusters are made according to their hallmark characteristics, and the similarity between these personality disorders is that the paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal person actually avoids social relationships, and they're kind of peculiar or odd, weird, but not psychotic. Now, with regards to genetic or familial associations, we'll actually find out that the paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal person will have a lineage of psychotic illness in their family line. Now, let's discuss cluster B. Cluster B will include four types of personality disorders. They will include the histrionic personality, the narcissistic personality, the borderline personality, and the antisocial personality. And what kind of groups them together will be the following hallmark characteristics. They are kind of dramatic, emotional, and inconsistent. And with regards to genetic or familial associations, the histrionic, narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial personality disorders will have some mood disorder, substance abuse, or somatoform disorder in their family line. Okay, now let's go to cluster C. Cluster C is composed of three personality disorders. These are the avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. Their hallmark characteristics, they are fearful and anxious people. So just from the hallmark characteristics, running through their genes or family line are the anxiety disorders. Now, for the DSM diagnosis, a personality disorder must be present by early adulthood. If it likely occurred after in later life, then probably it's not, we can't classify it as a personality disorder. It has to happen earlier in life. So now that we've discussed the three clusters, A, B, and C, let's kind of run down through them one by one. First, let's discuss the paranoid personality disorder. Now, of course, as the name implies, it involves the symptoms of paranoia, wherein the individual is distrustful, suspicious, guarded, and vigilant towards other people. They actually interpret the motives of others as malicious, and they believe that others intend to do them harm. Paranoid people. Also, they kind of blame others for their own problems. In psychoanalytic theory, it's believed that people with paranoid personality disorder actually heavily use the defense mechanism called projection. This means is that they have these thoughts in their mind, and then instead of owning these thoughts, they kind of transfer it to others. So they believe that it's other people thinking these thoughts rather than them. So that's what we call projection. They project their own thoughts onto others, and now they become the victim of actually their own thoughts that originated with them. According to the cognitive behavioral perspective, paranoia is a product of a false belief or the mistaken assumption that other people are harmful. So what does the treatment for the paranoid personality disordered people entail? Number one, it entails assertiveness training. So rather than feeling victimized, they can assert themselves in socially acceptable ways. And secondly, the therapist will help to counter the client's mistaken assumptions. So the therapist will correct the false beliefs of the client. Now let's discuss the schizoid and the schizotypal personality disorders. Both the schizoid and the schizotypal personality disorders involve schizophrenic-like qualities, but without the very disturbed thinking that schizophrenia has. In fact, there's a debate as to whether the schizotypal or schizoid personality disorders are actually variants of schizophrenia rather than independent disorders. Long-term research actually suggests that these disorders may be linked to schizophrenia. So let's discuss the schizoid individual. The schizoid individual is something like a very loner type of person. In fact, something more like a hermit. But his or her reason for being a hermit is that he or she has an aversion, a disgust for close relationships. And then there's a feeling of detachment. And then the person has restricted emotions. The person lacks empathy for the feelings of others. And then because of all these, there's a long-standing pattern of voluntarily withdrawing oneself socially. Thereby, they live a secluded and isolated lifestyle. Nevertheless, when we talk to them, we'll find out that they really have no thought disorder. Now let's discuss the schizotypal personality disorder. They're kind of different because they have odd, bizarre, or unusual ways of reacting to others and viewing the world. They have odd thought patterns, which include magical thinking. Like for instance, superstitions would fall under the category of magical thinking. They believe that one's thoughts can affect the course of events. But again, when we talk with them, there is no frank psychosis. Now, the treatment for schizoid and schizotypal personalities is difficult because, of course, the schizoid personality will avoid human interaction, so he or she will not want to go to a shrink. Whereas the schizotypal personality is comfortable with his or her peculiar ways of thinking and being, so he or she will not want to change it. Now let's discuss the cluster B personality disorders. And what I told you a while ago is that they're kind of dramatic, emotional, and also inconsistent. First is the histrionic personality disorder. People who are histrionic are characterized by having an excess of emotionality. They're kind of emotional, no? And they tend to be theatrical, extroverted, and they enjoy being the center of attention. In Tagalog, we know them as very maarte. They are perceived also to be the life of the party. So if there's someone there in the party who's kind of theatrical, dramatic, calling for attention, most probably they're histrionic people. Also, they're kind of flirtatious. They're flirts. They're also sexually provocative. meaning they're seductive. However, even if they're seductive or sexually provocative, their intimacy level is quite low, tend to be very superficial with regards to their relationships. They're also shallow and vain, and they can't maintain intimate relationships. So people with histrionic personality disorder exhibit stereotyped sex role behaviors. So they're either ultra feminine, or when they dress up or they act, they're kind of ultra masculine. They're caricatures of femininity and masculinity. Now, if there's a career which will draw or attract histrionic people, probably it's in showbiz. Because people in showbiz are theatrical, emotional, dramatic. So basically, they'll fit into that industry, and in that industry, they'll actually be normal. Now let's discuss the narcissistic personality disorder. If the histrionic personality has an excessive display of emotions, the narcissist or the person with the narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by an excess of egocentrism. So there's a self-absorption into one's ego. So the narcissistic individual is self-centered and has a special sense of entitlement and expects also to be the focus of attention. And then the narcissist will look down on people and thereby will lack an empathy for what they feel. They may even bully the people around them because all the people around them are kind of inferior beings as compared to them. Psychodynamic theory will regard the narcissist as having unresolved conflicts with sexuality. It's another way of being hyper-masculine, being the alpha male. So while with the histrionic people, it's more about the looks, and the display of emotions. Here, it's being about the alpha male and making other people subordinate to themselves. They're the boss. All the others are inferior. Now, the narcissist will also regard themselves to be privileged and entitled to receive special attention. And from a psychodynamic point of view, probably the psychoanalyst will say there might be a deficiency in the attention that was given to him or her as a child, or if not a deficiency, there might be an excess of attention. That's why even as as an older person, the narcissist will still look for that attention given to him or her. Now, from a cognitive behavioral perspective, the therapist would work towards reducing the grandiosity of the narcissist, make the person more down to earth, and then help the narcissist to develop an empathy with others so that the person can relate better with the people around him or her. So I'm sure you've come across people who are narcissists because you feel that they're arrogant and that they think of themselves and they just don't feel what other people may be feeling. Now, this is an interesting personality disorder. It's the borderline personality disorder. Why borderline? Because they are at the border of psychosis. They're neurotics, but then they're bordering on the edge of psychosis. Now, these people have a very poor sense of self, a very poor self-identity. So they're kind of confused about themselves. And when they're into a relationship, the relationship can be very stormy. It can be a roller coaster ride emotionally when you have a relationship with these people. Because borderline people will sometimes put you up on a pedestal, and then at other times you'll be the scum of the earth for them. So either you're up or you're down, and you're never in between. That's also how they relate to you. Sometimes they love you so much. You're the only thing that can be loved. You're the only person that can be loved. And then later on, they hate you so much. They might even want to kill you. That's why we have this thing called fatal attraction. With people who are fatally attracted, they probably have borderline personality disorder. So based on what I just said, we can surmise that people with BPD or borderline personality disorder can actually be very moody and at times even violent, sometimes towards themselves, sometimes towards others. Just a few days ago, I was talking with a person with BPD, and she actually sprayed her lover with Baygon out of extreme anger. So they can actually be very scary. And so these people are erratic, impulsive, unstable in their behavior and mood. But you know what? Sometimes they can also feel so bored with life, feel very alone, feel very empty. And then when they feel the emptiness, they start having thoughts of suicide. Sometimes they act it out. Or sometimes out of boredom, they just cut themselves. Sometimes just to wanting to die. Sometimes just to feel some physical sensation or some emotion out of boredom or out of numbness. Because for them, sometimes it's better to feel something like pain rather than feel nothing at all. So that makes me suspect, no? There are probably some people who are emo might actually have BPD or borderline personality disorder. Now, people with BPD or borderline personality disorder may also have comorbid mood disorders or eating disorders. And they may also have mini psychotic episodes. So at times they may get very paranoid. And in those times, they actually lose their contact with reality. What are the theoretical explanations for people with BPD? The psychoanalysts will of course trace it back to childhood, wherein they believe that there was inadequate parenting such that the person with BPD as a child kind of merged with the parent, and thus the person was not nurtured as a separate autonomous being. And then, building upon this notion, some researchers will point out that there's also a prevalence of early life neglect and abuse with people with BPD, and therefore they also want to merge with people because that's what they lacked. So either they merged with their caregiver as a child, or right from the start they were neglected and abused, and now they're looking for the merging with others. From a cognitive behavioral perspective, people with BPD are believed to think in terms of all or none, in terms of black or white. So there's no in between. That's why when they fall in love with you, they either love you so much or they hate you. Now, with regards to the treatment and therapy of people with BPD, it can actually get very difficult and challenging. And the reason is because the person with BPD will also have a tendency to idolize and idealize the therapist at one time, and then later on will treat the therapist as if he or she was the scum of the earth. So it gets really bad for the therapist also. And then, of course, the therapist, being a human being, will also have his or her own counter-transference. So there's transference, counter-transference going on, and at the end, the therapist will also probably need his or her own therapy to get out the emotional baggage inflicted on him or her by the BPD client. So there's a debate about whether the therapist should be confrontational or be supportive with the BPD client. And really, I think it should be both. The therapist should kind of feel his or her way through. However, most clinicians will agree that The BPD patient should be provided with a sense of stability and predictability. We should help the client establish a sense of identity, and then help the client also abandon the self-destructive behaviors. There, so that's the BPD client. Hopefully, you don't fall in love with somebody with borderline personality disorder. Because if you do, probably you also have another type of personality disorder to fall in love with a BPD patient. Next on the list is the antisocial personality disorder. Now, when we talk about antisocial, we're not referring to a person who is shy, or timid. We're actually referring to a person who is anti-social norms. So the antisocial personality actually will disregard or refuse to conform to social norms, laws, and moral standards of society. They actually show no guilt or concern for others. And they're also often associated with criminal behavior. When they're children, they're usually diagnosed to have a conduct disorder. So they get into fights, or even in school, in grade school, they may be bringing weapons, they join gangs, etc. Or they may get themselves already involved in drugs, other vices. And then, as they get older, it becomes more apparent that they engage in criminal behavior such that they're called sociopaths, or people with criminal minds. They're criminally minded. According to biological theories, it's believed that they're actually wired differently than most people, in the sense that they don't learn from the negative consequences of their behaviors. So they may get spanked as a child, or they may get imprisoned as an adult, but then they'll still keep on doing their criminal or criminal-like acts. And then they also get physiologically aroused by the criminal acts. That means that that's their trip. That's where they get their thrill from breaking the law. There is also compelling evidence in support of genetic patterns of inheritance. So being an antisocial personality might actually have been transmitted through the genes. Through research, it's been found out that many antisocial individuals actually grew up in homes wherein they received inconsistent discipline. So sometimes they were punished for a misdeed, but probably many times they got away with their misdeeds. And they also grew up in impoverished standard of living. And many of them also had absent parents. Now, the antisocial PD, or personality disorder, cannot be diagnosed until age 18. Prior to this age, the diagnosis is probably a conduct disorder. So the treatment for antisocial personality disorder is actually, again, very difficult because they lack the incentive to seek help voluntarily. They're not the ones going to the shrink. They're the ones being brought by their relatives or by law enforcers to the shrink. And when such individuals go to treatment, the clinician's goal is actually to help them develop a sense of empathy or even morality, being sensitive to the hurtful effects of their behaviors. And that will be quite difficult. So many times, we just place the antisocial personality or the antisocial individual in rehabs where they can be taken care of to develop a sense of morality and empathy. By the way, this might interest you that it's very easy for ladies to fall in love with people with antisocial personality disorder. That's because these people with APD, antisocial personality disorder, are perceived to be tough guys. So they're easy to fall in love with because with regards to evolution, of course, women are more prone to get attracted to guys who can fend for the family, and fight. However, people with APD actually don't fight for the family. They fight for whatever thrills them. So my advice for you is to avoid falling in love with the bad boys. They may look or seem attractive. They may look macho. But I think you'll have a problem in your relationship and also in your family. Okay, now let's discuss the cluster C personality disorders. They include avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. First, let's talk about the avoidant and dependent personality disorders. The avoidant and dependent personalities actually represent two extremes of relating to people. The avoidant personality will shun contact with others, while the dependent individual cannot survive without other people's help or support. First, the avoidant personality. The avoidant personality has feelings of inferiority such that he or she is sensitive to being criticized and sensitive that he or she might be rejected. Thus, the avoidant personality socially withdraws from others out of fear of being criticized or rejected. Now let's contrast. Let's differentiate the avoidant personality and the schizoid personality because both of them will actually avoid people. No, the schizoid personality does not mind avoiding people. It's actually part of his nature to avoid people and be a hermit. Whereas the avoidant personality, it's more about having a sense of inferiority and fear. That's why he or she avoids people. So they're different. Now the dependent individual relies excessively on other people, even in decision making or even in acting out what he or she wants. They rely on others. That's why it's most probable that dependent individuals don't develop the skills or the abilities to handle problems in life. So that means they always have to rely on others. They allow others to make decisions for themselves, and they have poor self-confidence, and they fear being deserted, abandoned, or left alone. Because if there's nobody, how can they live? They don't have the skill sets. And they may even tolerate the abuse by domestic partners because they've become so dependent on other people. So even if their partner was a wife or husband beater, they would stay. And if you fell in love with a person who had a borderline personality disorder, most probably you would experience verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse from the borderline person, which means that you might actually have a dependent personality disorder to have fallen in love with him or her. Okay, now so to explain this disorder in terms of the psychodynamic approach, it's believed that there was a disturbance in the individual's early attachment with his or her caregiver. And the treatment of the disorder from the cognitive behavioral perspective involves breaking the negative cycles of mistaken or erroneous beliefs. Now let's discuss the obsessive compulsive personality disorder. In short, we call it OCPD, and we refer to them as ok-ok, and they're quite obvious because they're very controlling and perfectionist. So the obsessive compulsive personality disorder has a conflict regarding the issue of control. People with OCPD are perfectionistic, very orderly, inflexible, and stubborn. They're concerned with the unimportant details of life, and the individual becomes set on rigid rules and routines. They can't break away from their own rules and routines. Then they're also very indecisive because they have to think a lot, and so what happens is analysis paralysis. Because they're thinking of all the details, they slow down and they become inefficient at accomplishing their tasks. Sometimes they have to do all their rituals, before they can actually accomplish their task. Now, people with obsessive compulsive PD fear the consequence of making mistakes. That's why they're very detailed. And so their self-esteem hinges on seeing themselves as perfect. They have to be perfect. Either they do a perfect job or not at all. So you can see that it will really delay the efficiency.